Hi, this is Vivian Vande Velde. I am going to read to you from the Rumpelstiltskin Problem. This is the way it looked in hardcover. This is the way it looked in paperback. This is the Scholastic Book Club edition. And this is the way it appeared in Japan. Now, in Japan, people read from left to right. So what looks like the front what looks like the back is actually the front, and what looks like the front is actually the back. I get confused enough with this camera and where to hold things, so I'm lucky that I don't have to deal with that. But here is the author's note from Rumpelstiltskin. There's a game we used to play when I was in school that kids still play. We used to call it gossip. Someone would whisper something to one person who was supposed to whisper the same thing to the next person, who whispered it to the next, and so on until the last person said it out loud, at which point everyone would laugh because little by little along the way, bits and pieces had been left out or misheard, other words had been added, details were lost, the sense changed, and the final message was usually totally different from the original. That's the way it is with fairy tales. In the beginning, they were told, not written down. And over time, as the stories were repeated by different people in different situations, they constantly shifted and changed. The way your story might shift and change, for example, if you were caught putting shaving cream on your cat. How you justified the situation to your parents might differ sharply from what you told your friends, which would probably be different from any explanation you might offer to the cat. That's why we sometimes have completely different versions of the same story. But in some cases, so many details have been lost that the story stops making sense. That's how I feel about the story of Rumpelstiltskin. It makes no sense. The story starts with the poor miller telling the king, "My daughter can spin straw into gold." We are not told how the miller has come to be talking with the king in the first place, or why the miller chooses to say such a thing. In any case, in my mind, the reasonable answer for the king to come back with would be, "If your daughter can spin straw into gold, why are you a poor miller?" But the king doesn't say that. He says, "Then she shall come to my castle and spin straw into gold for me. And if she does, I'll make her my queen." Now, no matter the reason the miller said what he did, you'd think that in reality he would have noticed that his daughter doesn't actually know how to spin straw into gold, unless she's lied to him, in which case you'd think that now would be the time for her to set things straight. But still, he brings her to the castle to show off a talent he knows she doesn't have, which doesn't sound to me like responsible parenting. At the castle, the king locks the girl into a room and tells her, "Spin this straw into gold, or tomorrow you shall die." Not my idea of a promising first date. The girl seems smarter than her father. She knows that she can't spin straw into gold, so she's worried. But what does she do? She starts crying. Not a very productive plan. Still, along comes a little man who, by happy coincidence, knows how to do what everyone wants. "What will you give me to spin the straw into gold for you?" he asks her, and she offers him her gold ring. Now think about this. Here's someone who can spin an entire roomful of straw into gold. Why does he need her tiny gold ring? Sounds like a bad bargain to me. But the little man agrees and spins the straw into gold. Is the king satisfied? Of course not. The next night he locks her into an even bigger room with even more straw and offers her the same deal. "Spin the straw into gold, or tomorrow you shall die." Again the little man comes. Again he gets her butt out of trouble, this time in exchange for a necklace. Apparently the poor miller has a secret stash somewhere to keep his daughter and all this jewelry, and yet again the king makes his demand: straw for gold. At this point the girl has run out of jewelry, but the little man says he'll spin one more time if she'll promise him her firstborn child. Why he wants this child, he never says, and she never asks. Obviously, the miller's daughter is no more a responsible parent than her father is, for she agrees to the bargain. Fortunately for everyone, the next morning the king is finally satisfied with the amount of gold the girl has spun for him, and he asks her to marry him. Swept off her feet because he's such a sweet talker, spin or die, she accepts the king's proposal. Eventually, the happy couple has a child, and the little man suddenly shows up to demand what has been promised to him. Again, the girl cries, perhaps hoping that yet another little man will step forward to get her out of trouble. Although the deal clearly was firstborn child for a roomful of straw spun into gold, the little man now offers the queen a way out. Guess my name, he says, and you may keep the child. And if she doesn't guess his name, what does he get besides the child she has already promised him? Nothing. I told you, this guy doesn't know how to bargain. You wouldn't want to go to a garage sale with him. He'd talk the prices up. Now, the queen should be able to guess the little guy's name is Rumpelstiltskin by noticing that that's the name of the story. And since nobody else in the kingdom has his name, she might go with that first. But nobody in this kingdom is very smart. So instead, the queen sends the servants out into the countryside to look for likely names. Luckily for her, at the last moment, one of the servants spots the little man dancing around a campfire, singing a bad poem that ends with the line, Rumpelstiltskin is my name. Why is he doing this? Because if he was singing Kumbaya, the story would go on even longer. Being from this kingdom of the mentally challenged, the servant doesn't recognize the importance of what he has observed. I couldn't find any names, he tells her. All I found was this little guy dancing around a campfire singing Rumpelstiltskin is my name. You wouldn't want to put this guy in charge of complicated international relations. Now, we aren't told whether the queen is really, really stupid, which would be my first choice, or whether she's playing a cruel game with the little man who, after all, 3 times spun gold for her and then offered her a last-minute chance to get out of her ill-chosen bargain. But when he shows up and asks if she's found out his name, she says first, is it George? Is it Harry? And only then asks, is it Rumpelstiltskin? Justifiably annoyed, the little guy stamps his foot, which cracks the castle floor. The king, who, by the way, has disappeared from the story, should have asked her to spin that straw into something useful instead of all that gold, like maybe a floor covering that wouldn't crack when a man consistently described as little stamped his foot. But anyway, there's Rumpelstiltskin with his foot caught in the floor, and in a really resourceful case of, well, I'll show them, he, excuse me, he gets so mad he tears himself in two. Excuse me? What do you think your teacher would say if you handed in a story like that? I think you'd be lucky to get a D minus, and that's assuming your spelling was good. It was asking myself these questions that came, I'm sorry, it was by asking myself all these questions that I came to write these stories. Now, as a writing idea, one thing that you can do is think about what is your favorite fairy tale or the fairy tale that you think makes the least amount of sense, and try rewriting it, either so that the story makes sense or by taking the viewpoint of a different character. So, for example, if you were going to tell the story of Cinderella, what would the story be like if you told it from the point of view of the prince or of one of the stepsisters? Or usually we assume that the story is set way back in time. What about if you set it today so that it wouldn't be a royal ball that was in question, but maybe a school dance? Or what would happen if you set it slightly in the future? So maybe on a um, space station, what would happen then? Or you could set the story someplace else. Usually it's kind of a vaguely European kind of story, but you might think of your own family background or where you've taken a vacation and say, what if I set the story of Cinderella in the Caribbean? Or what if I set it in Japan? Or what if I set it in Ghana? What if I sent it someplace like Texas? Think about what kind of stories you could write by changing some of the elements of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, stay safe and be kind.